Hey gang, welcome to the first video of the year that's going to help you understand a little bit more of what we've been reading about this week in the Middle Ages. I hope this video provides a little brief overview and introduction to some of the things that you've been reading about in the packet and in class. So let's take a start. Now, royalty provides people protection in the Middle Ages. Remember, during the Roman Empire, it was the Roman military and the Roman emperor and the Roman government that made sure that everyone in the Roman Empire was protected. You had the military spread all the way out to Africa, Europe, Asia. And here, when the Roman Empire gets too big and eventually collapses, different kingdoms are going to be created. It's a time period from about 476 CE to about 1300 CE. And we look at these as the Middle Ages and late Middle Age period, just before we get to the Renaissance era. Now, in understanding this, when the Roman Empire collapsed, we see these things called kingdoms come about. There was no way that Rome really could have kept all of that territory united. I mean, you had places in Germany, places in France and Spain, in Rome itself and Italy, places in Northern Africa, Turkey, Poland, Belarus, Ukraine. All of those areas at the time were all once controlled under one empire. Well, when that finally collapsed, all of those areas that had the same group of people, that had the same geographic location, that had the same cultural connections, that spoke the same language, that had some of the same faith-based beliefs, that's where kingdoms come about. And so these kingdoms are going to be small areas where people have a lot of commonalities in language and culture, where one ruler comes to the top and takes over and then says, all of you people in my area, you guys are going to be a part of my or our kingdom. One great example is Charles the Great, or Charlemagne, as we will read about in the packet. Charles the Great, or Charlemagne, that beautiful 6-foot-tall general, the one who literally took over the Franks, part of present-day France. Charlemagne was a great example of a king who took over an area where people had commonalities in language and culture. And Charlemagne wanted to do something different than previous rulers or emperors of Rome, etc. Charlemagne introduced a lot of really cool ideas. He created a well-organized army. Instead of just paying them, he actually fought with them. He led troops into battle, gave them land, gave them a paycheck, took care of their families, which was kind of new at the time. He also standardized a currency. Instead of this bartering and trading, we'll create a standard silver gold coin currency. We kind of have that today, don't we? I mean, I'm not trading chickens for pigs, mainly because it's not kosher. He also got rid of the idea that the Roman emperor could say whether you lived or died. He kind of came up with the concept of a fair trial. So people were innocent until proven guilty, where they would present their cases instead of just saying, I don't really like you, you're dead. That was a big deal because it made citizenship somewhat kind of an equal balance. That the lowest class people were treated like the middle class people and a little bit of the upper class people when it came to the law. Charlemagne also created a new government system with counts and councils. Instead of him just being the supreme ruler, he said, let's have other people below run their area of land and have these basic governments work together for this kingdom of the Franks, present-day France. He also created a school. Though Charlemagne struggled to read and write, he could barely do either of the two, he loved it when people read to him and loved learning more and more and more. You could learn something about that. And he wanted to know everything he could possibly know so he could be a good ruler, a good general, and a good person. So he even created the idea of a concept of having like schooling systems so that way people could go and learn and then better his empire. And then finally, he had a very distinguished way of carrying himself. He was a religious man who worshipped Christianity, and he believed that Christianity would unite his people, and those people were united by Christianity. Now, I spent all this time talking about Charlemagne to go back to the concept of feudalism. Feudalism is that social hierarchy where you had kings at the top, then below the kings, you had nobles and lords who were given fiefs or land grants. And then these nobles and lords would give land to other people in return for their protection. So it would be as if saying, I'm the king, And I would like to make sure that these people are taken care of. You are my loyal subject. You are my loyal subject. You are my loyal subject, my loyal friend. Yes, you. Here's some land, here's some land, here's some land, here's some land. Now, make sure we have people to protect this land. That's where the knights come in. We've got knights. And we're going to look at knights in a lot of detail in class later on. They're the ones protecting the fief, protecting the land, protecting the kingdom. And knights were kind of like a really, 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 really big deal during the Middle Ages. And then below the knights, 90% of Europe at the time, 7th graders, serfs forever. The serfs are the peasants. And you had like two kind of class of serfs. You had skilled serfs, and then you had everyone else. Skilled serfs like cobblers, tailors, blacksmiths, silversmiths, people who welded and made goods. And then you had the other serfs, unskilled serfs, or peasants really, who they never owned land. They were just told to farm this land. They all pretty much grew up in one-room homes, and they even sometimes lived with their own animals. It's kind of weird. Not like dogs and cats, but like pigs and sheep and chickens. Now, in that sense, they were the ones who grew the food. They were the ones who planted crops. They were the one who made sure that the kingdom had the food and the kingdom had the supplies. The serfs, they're the backbone of the economy in the Middle Ages. And they're going to not really love this so much, but they're also seeking protection from the knights. And that's important. The knights will protect the land that the serfs will farm. The knights will protect the nobles and lords in their land and make sure that the king is always happy. Now, one of the other reasons why these kingdoms came about and why we see the rise of building castles and why we see such big protective areas in these kingdoms is because one of the coolest groups in world history, the Vikings, not the Minnesota Vikings, but the Vikings. From about 800 to 1100 CE, a group of Scandinavians, Swedes, and Norwegians from the area just north of modern day like mainland Europe, here in Sweden, Norway, and Scandinavia as it's called, they were men who came on longboats, a new technology at the time. Google Viking longboat, you'll see a bunch of random things come up that are modern. But if you Google Viking longboat, these were 30 to 50 to 70 foot long boats that had people on both sides rowing the boats. And they were massive compared to the type of boats that they had back in the day. And they could sail across oceans and channels. I mean, in 1000 CE, Leif Erikson and Eric the Red, Vikings, will bring their area, they will bring their culture across the Atlantic Ocean to Iceland, to Greenland, to northern Canada on big rowboats. Again, Google Viking longboats and tell me if you want to go across the Atlantic Ocean. I don't think you'd want to do so. I think you prefer Delta First Class, which I get. But the Vikings were a group of people that made these kingdoms important. They didn't really, and no horns on the helmets. The whole like Minnesota Vikings helmet, they didn't have how could they run around with horns on their helmets? It wouldn't work. It wouldn't make sense. It's a myth. They were warriors, and I mean warriors. They would attack villages, churches, monasteries, anything, and it would be an instant attack. They would go into the towns, sack and destroy all the area they could, take all the resources they could, kill as many people as they could, get back on their boats and go away. At one point, even people in France said, if the Vikings come, because they had heard about them, if the Vikings come across the channel, which is a big word for the ocean, just give them what they want and don't fight them. Just let them have it. That's how important these people were. And so their reign, their raids of towns and churches to get complete control and taking of these goods, that's a real big concept. That's where the fear and the idea of building these massive castles and having these protective systems came about. But if we got to go back to feudalism, one could say that Charlemagne might be the guy who really created feudalism, because he was the first to really create a modern day kingdom in the Middle Ages. I hope you enjoyed this video. More will come over as the year progresses. And so this is your brief introduction to what we say are the Middle Ages. In the next video, we're going to talk about what it was like to be a knight. We're going to take a look at William the Conqueror. We're going to take a look at feudal life itself. Hope you enjoyed the video. Be good.